Hi, friends. Welcome to the Infertility Club. I am so excited for today's guest, Emily Brady. She is an amazing mama of 4 beautiful IVF kids. She has been an inspiration to me on my entire IVF journey. Emily was like my guru that I would always go to and have questions. And she is one of the most talented people I know, an amazing cook, a fantastic photographer. She seriously does it all. Emily, thank you so much for being here today.
So excited. This is amazing. Really fast, I want to say I'm so proud of you for doing this. This podcast is so needed. There are so many people who are just grasping at straws for like just a little bit of hope. And I hope when people are able to listen to your words and the guests that you have, that they'll be able to feel just a little bit of hope, like they can make it through.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. That's how I felt too. I just felt like there was just this need and that gap where it's hard to find people who are going through it. And so it's like anyone that I knew I would just cling on to. And
Yeah.
you need that hope and to know that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your journey to motherhood. What did that look like for you?
The first time we did in vitro was 15 years ago. Over 15 years ago. And so it was just in the beginning stages of IVF. Not a lot of people had done IVF. I didn't know a lot of people that had done it. And unfortunately, the people that I knew that had done IVF, it hadn't been successful the first time. So it was even that much scarier for us. We traveled to California to do in vitro because here in Utah, it was still so new. And we had a doctor here in Utah that was doing in vitro, but we had to do an additional step called ICSI, which was super new in the industry. So we went out to California to see, his name was Dr. Mars, and he was one of the doctors that helped invent in vitro. He was like one of the first doctors in the industry. So when we first got married, so we've been married, holy cow.
Been a little bit.
We've been married for 18 years. And so we got married. I was super anxious to have kids. I always knew I wanted to be a mom. That was like my whole life goal was to have kids. And so like most people, I just thought it was just going to happen. And, we were going to have this surprise, like accident baby. Brett, my husband was not hoping for that, but I secretly was. It was always like, I hated birth control. We hated condoms. We hated all of like
Yes,
the
me too.
methods for preventing pregnancy. And so I was never good about taking birth control or I was always just like, well, if we get pregnant, we'll get pregnant. But it just never happened. Finally, I convinced Brett to like start like trying, and we weren't protecting. And I just thought we were going to get pregnant. And so we tried for a year and I was just super bummed, like month after month. Everyone can relate to that negative pregnancy test, and you're like a day late and you're like, oh, I'm pregnant.
Totally.
And it was just, just kind of disheartening. But I just figured like, oh, it'll happen when it happens. So after a year, my sister-in-law, who she's not my sister-in-law anymore, they unfortunately got divorced. But at the time, she knew from a young age that she would not be able to have kids. And so they had gone through the in vitro process. And she just put me in touch with the doctor and was like, hey, you guys have been trying for a year. You should just go and get some blood work done, check your hormone levels, and just kind of see. And luckily, that doctor, which this is not super common, I think most of the time, everyone always looks at the woman first. I think a lot of times that is the case. Like hormones off, sometimes it's endometriosis or PCOS or lots of different possibilities, but they just did like a simple blood work, hormone check on me, and everything came back normal. So when a lot of times when that happens, they're like, oh, just keep trying. But luckily this doctor was like, let's get your husband tested too. And so he went in and got tested. And we were actually talking about this the other night when we were talking about that I was going to do this podcast with you. And I was asking my husband, I was like, don't you think it's odd that So he went in and got tested, and they called me with his results. I thought that was
Oh,
so
that's
interesting.
interesting.
I've never actually thought about that until now, but they called me to tell me the results instead of,
Yeah,
I thought that was so interesting, which is like,
that
it
is.
circles back to this whole idea of, I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but a lot of times it's like a burden that women carry.
Oh, for
It's like,
sure. Yeah.
we, and here in this
Yes.
situation, it it wasn't that my hormones are off. My everything looked good with
Mhm.
me. It was my husband's sperm count and motility and all that, but they were calling me to tell me,
Yeah.
and I had to deliver the news to. It was
Oh my
just
gosh.
so
Yeah.
interesting. And I actually, so they called me and they said basically, your husband's sperm count is extremely low. They explained it to me this way. They said 40 million ish sperm is considered totally normal for a man. 20 million is starts to get in like the range of like you might have a hard time getting pregnant. Anything below 20 million is considered like malfactor. Like you're not going to be getting pregnant on your own. My husband's sperm count was 200,000. So incredibly low, but of the 200,000, only 5% could actually swim. So they basically said, you are never going to get pregnant on your own. You have to do in vitro. And on top of that, we recommend that you do ICSI, where they actually go in and microscopically inject the sperm into the egg. Like that's really your best chance. And I was just like devastated. I was just like, this is like, I guess we're going down this road. Like I
Great news.
was just totally blindsided. I just assumed it would come back normal and then it would be the whole keep trying. And
Totally.
so I actually didn't call my husband. I called my mom. I could not stop crying. I was just sobbing. And I just told my mom, I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be a mom. I don't know. I just kept saying that. I don't know if I'm ever going to be a mom. And she was just like, you've got this. Like, you and Brett can work through this. Like, let's figure this out. And so I like calmed down and I don't remember. I think I called Brett. I was trying to remember if I called him or he came home from work. Or like I think I called him and I just told him, the results of the
Mhm.
hemoanalysis. And anyway, and he was just like, all right, well, I guess we're gonna have to go down this road. And it's all the thoughts of how are we gonna afford this? How are we gonna handle it emotionally? Like, do we need to wait,
Mhm.
3 years? Do we just jump in head first? Like all of these questions. And then it's like, it's so much money. How do we know it's even gonna work? It's like investing in something with zero guarantees.
Oh,
Uh,
you're yeah.
and by this time, let's see, we had been married for 3 years.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so we just decided that we were going to dive in. We learned all about all of the meds. We learned levels and hormones. And I also kind of was naive. I'm like, oh, since it's, you know, he is the factor here. I
Mhm.
don't really like, they'll just, but no, like it's the exact same process for me. I have to take all the menopur and all the, follistim and get all of my ovaries and, plumped up and get those follicles and get all the eggs. So we did all the medications here and then we traveled out to California, stayed there for a week, which also adds to the expense of the whole
Oh, for
process.
sure. Yeah.
So stay there and we tried to make it fun. We went to Disneyland and we didn't time it very well. I went to Disneyland after I had had my egg retrieval.
Oh,
And so I,
we're feeling the
well,
best.
it was like in between because you can't go before they take your eggs out
Mhm.
because you have to be like very careful. And then
Mhm.
they take them out, but then you can't go after they implant them because you have your princess days where you're on bed rest. So I
Yeah.
guess that really was the best time, but I was in a wheelchair and Brett was pushing me around at Disneyland.
Oh my gosh, that's so
And,
great.
and back then, for my situation, the growth of my embryos, they decided to implant 3 at 3 days. So normally now you have to wait until like blastocyst or whatever, where it's 5 days after the retrieval. And I don't know if it's just like the advancements, but They did a 3-day transfer and we put 3 embryos in, and they were all A grade. It was a 6-cell, 7-cell, and an 8-cell. The 8-cell was like the best possible one. And I remember them implanting 3, and I was like, such a bizarre feeling because you want all of them to survive, but at the same time, you're like, I don't really know if I want triplets. But I remember just being like, I really, really just hope at least one of them sticks. And so, and the long waiting game. And I remember when they called to tell me I was pregnant, it was just like this wave of like, like we did it. And they told me, they said, since your hormones are good, like if you get pregnant, like you should be good. Like I don't think you should worry too much about miscarrying and all of that. But I still had to do all the hormones and all the injections. And then, yeah, we had our little boy, and now he's a giant human. He's almost taller than me.
He's grown
like the same height. Like every day we like measure.
He's tall now.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm 5'9". So he's
tall.
He's huge. So we had him, and then it was this process of like, okay, when do we do it again? Like,
Totally.
I wanted to have a sibling. Like and I think that's the roller coaster of infertility. It's like the want of another baby, but you don't want them to be too far apart, but you know how expensive it is. And you're like, do I really want to put myself through that again? But yeah, I was like, if we only have 2 kids, like I'd rather have them be closer together. And so we went for it again. We started the whole process again, went back out to California, stayed there, same thing. We were there for a week. And then I remember I was having such a low day. It's like my levels weren't looking super great. We didn't have the egg retrieval yet. I didn't have as many follicles as we did the time before. It's just all these, crushing realities of like, this might not work. It worked the first time, but it might not work this time. And I remember my mom just said, what if I just get on an airplane with Steele, our little boy, and we'll come out and see you guys? And I was just like, yes, that's what I just want my baby. He was like 18 months at the time, maybe even like 15 months, because they're like 2 years apart. He was just still my little baby. And they flew out, and I remember just hugging him and just crying like, oh, this is what I needed. Like, this is why I'm doing this. Like, this whole process, like, this is what it's all about, is having a baby in your arms, And we went through the whole process. This time they just transferred 2 embryos, which I was freaking out about only transferring 2, because I was like, they transferred 3 last time and I just got 1, so I don't want to just put 2 in. But they transferred 2 like perfect embryos, 8-cell, again, 3-day transfer, and that long waiting game again. And with her, it was even more stressful because I started bleeding pretty bad before I knew I was pregnant, which about getting a heart attack, I ended up having a cyst that ruptured. It was so painful. And I thought I was miscarrying. I thought it was just so emotionally so taxing.
Oh yeah.
I remember walking into the hospital to get my blood drawn for like the pregnancy. And I remember just sitting there thinking, why am I even here? Like, I'm not pregnant. I'm bleeding. Like, this didn't work. Like, what's the point of even doing my blood draw? Like, I'm not pregnant. And I just remember kept having this like thought in the back of my head is like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I didn't know what that meant. And I was kind of annoyed because I was like, what does that even mean?
Totally.
Like, what does that mean? Like, everything's going to be okay. Well, does that mean I'm pregnant? Does that mean I'm going to have to do this again and then I'll get a baby? Like, so I just kept like telling myself, like, I don't know why I'm feeling like that, but it's going to be okay. And then they called. I was driving to my mom's house from a dentist appointment. I don't know why I did that to myself. In the dental chair with like tears streaming down my face. Like, okay? I'm like, yeah, I hope I'm pregnant.
Oh, that's so great.
I was driving home from the dentist office and I pulled up to my mom's house and they called and the nurse was like, well, do you want to hear some good news? And I was like, what? She was like, you're pregnant. And I was like, no way. Like, I was convinced that I wasn't.
Yeah.
I remember walking into my mom's house and I like got to the front door and I was like, I'm pregnant. And I just started.
Oh,
That was like the best feeling ever that it actually worked because I was just convinced that it hadn't worked.
totally. Well, and you have
Uh,
sisters too.
yeah. So then this is where the story gets interesting. So yeah, we had my little daughter. She was born in June and it was the best. Like we had a boy, we had a girl. It was just like the best feeling ever. And I'm trying to think of how old she was. I think she was like 3. And I just knew that our family was not complete. Like it just didn't feel complete. I think maybe a little bit because I just always wanted a really big family. And I think when you're told that that's really not a possibility, like if you want a big family, you're going to be either adopting or fostering or doing in vitro a lot of times, which just wasn't reasonable for us. So I think just the idea of like the mind shift of going from like, I want 5 or 6 kids to I have 2, but then you go through your mind of like, just be so grateful you have 2. Like so many
Yeah.
people through this process, so many failed attempts and they don't get any babies. Like just be
Mhm.
grateful. I think that that's like that internal battle with
For sure.
infertility. It's like
Yeah.
feeling gratitude, but also wanting something more.
For
And so,
sure. Yeah.
and then you doubt yourself. You're just like, why can't you just be content with what you have, you know?
Mhm.
But it was just this like relentless feeling of like, your family's not complete. Your family's not complete. And Brett was done. He was like, that is so exhausting. It's so
Mhm.
physically draining. Like, we have a boy, we have a girl, like, we're done. And
Yeah.
I kept, like every few months, like, I really feel like our family's not complete. And he just was like, you know what? If you want to figure out a way to pay for it, then, we'll do it again if you can figure out a way. And we went through so many different options. I was like, well, why don't we do like a race? Like we could do like a 5K and like
Mhm.
money that way. And he was just like, I hate asking people for money. Like he's just a very humble person that he just doesn't like asking for help. And so we went through all these different options and everything that I would like come to him with. He was just like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to ask people. I don't want to do a fundraiser. I don't want to do, no,
Mhm.
like try in here. Like I just really
Yeah.
another baby and I'm trying to figure this out. And then I was watching, this is forever ago, but there was a show on E that was like Juliana and Bill Rancic. Like they went through in vitro a ton of different times and she just could never stay pregnant. Anyway, so it was like this show and she ended up using a surrogate. I was like, it was like light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, I could do that. I could be a surrogate. My body's totally good. I know that my body will like accept an implanted embryo. I have pretty good pregnancies. I mean, I get sick, but not too bad. And I was like this moment of like, oh my gosh, that's it. Like, I'm going to be a surrogate. Then I can have a baby for someone else. And then I can use that money to then have a baby for us. Like, it will pay for our in vitro. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is huge.
Totally.
I was so excited. But I knew my husband would like, I was like, I want to get as much information as possible. So I was like researching and figuring out if this is even something that I could do, trying to
Mhm.
find other people that had done it. Like, is this possible? So I figured out exactly how much I could be paid, make sure it would cover in vitro, make sure all of that would be good. Then we were laying in bed one night and I like got up the courage. I was like, hey, I figured out a way to pay for in vitro. I was like, I'm going to be a surrogate. And he says, no, you're not. He was like, you are crazy. You are not doing that. You're not going to have a baby for someone else. And I was like, you know what? I have tried every other option. And you told me if I could figure out a way to pay for it, that we would do it again. And I figured out a way. And guess what? It's my body. Like, I'm the one that's like making this huge sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And I realize you have to be on board and you have to support me. So we can't do this if you're not on board. And so slowly after, it was probably took us like a month or two to like really decide that we wanted to do this. And then it was like trying to find someone. Like, you can't just go around being like, hey, do you want me to have a baby for you? Like, out to people who are going through infertility things, like, that's kind of intense to like find someone. And I mean, there's a ton of different stories of different people. I was lined up with a family in China. We were lined up with a family in Arizona. We flew down to Arizona. It just, nothing was clicking. And I just was to the point where I'm like, I don't care whose baby I have. Just like get pregnant so I can get this process over with so that I can turn around and do it all over again. Like, the longer this takes, the longer it's going to be for me to have a baby. We ended up going to the fertility center in Utah, in Pleasant Grove, and they had this family that was actually looking for a surrogate, and she had already had a baby of her own, and her second pregnancy implanted into her cesarean scar and ruptured, and she lost her uterus. So she had to go into emergency surgery and she almost died. And so they took her uterus, but she still had her ovaries. That was kind of one of our stipulations, is we really wanted it to be someone else's baby. Like, I wasn't being, so technically I wasn't a surrogate. I was a gestational carrier, if we're getting technical. So it wasn't my egg. It was completely their baby. We always used the phrase, their bun, my oven.
I love that.
I'm not the maker. I'm just the baker. We had all these like funny little things we would say. But anyway, so I met them and it was just, we went to dinner. It was instant connection. We clicked. We were like, let's do this. And I was pregnant a month later. So it was like, legal stuff was signed. My meds were started and they transferred. I was pregnant. I remember taking a picture and sending it to my brother and says, just babysitting for 9 months, like the picture of my belly. It's just, it is an interesting like concept of, you know, carrying someone else's baby. I got so sick. I was so sick, way more sick than I was with my kids, which is interesting. My pregnancy was very similar to her first pregnancy. So I think a lot of sicknesses and stuff has to do with genetics, because I had horrible heartburn, never had that with my kids. She had horrible heartburn, horrible morning sickness, similar times of day. Like, it was crazy how similar our pregnancy.
Interesting.
Anyway, and so then I had him, a little boy. That was in 2016. It's all a blur, honestly. Like, that like time was just a blur. I had a great experience. Labor and delivery was so amazing. She was there. He was there. Like, mom and dad were both there. Brett was there. And then she had like a gown on and immediately did skin to skin. Like, it was beautiful. Like,
So special.
It was a really, really cool experience. Nothing but good things to say about being a gestational carrier. It was like, it was very a smooth process. Do you remember we did a photo shoot at your house?
Yeah.
You know,
We did.
Yeah.
It was cute too.
like a maternity photo.
Yeah, it was so cute. You both were there.
I know.
I felt like you two did a really great job of like collaborating together to make this happen. And it was beautiful to see.
Yeah. So, and I think a lot of people always ask, like, how did you feel when he was born? Did you feel like attachment or, you know, and it was interesting. It was like the whole time it was like, he's not my baby. Like, he's their baby. I think afterwards was pretty emotional just because I was pumping for them and my body was like the hormones of like pumping, and then my body's like, where's your baby? So I did have a little bit of kind of postpartum just sadness.
Yeah.
So I would like wake Brett up at night and like make him like come close to me and like be by me while I was pumping, because that was really hard. So then I recovered for 8 months. I should have probably waited longer. So we went through the whole in vitro process, and now like the technology had grown so much since the first two times I had done it. It had been 6 years, and we did an egg retrieval, and then I just felt really good about doing a 3-day transfer again. We never had embryos that made it to 5-day ever. They always died. We never had any embryos to freeze. We always had to do a new cycle every time. And so I just was like, if we have two good solid embryos, I would rather have you transfer it 3 days. It's always worked. Like, we've never not had it work. I would rather have them back inside me in the best possible place than waiting till 5 days and then have them all die. And then what? We just are back to square one. Like, no. And so I was grateful the doctor listened to me. They're like, we really don't do 3-day transfers anymore. And I just was really adamant. We did a 3-day transfer. So we transferred two, again, perfect embryos. And then so I found out that I was pregnant. My hormone levels looked good. They looked like high, but not like crazy high. But my hormone levels always looked good. And I was driving and I got in a car accident. I was rear-ended from behind, like hard. And it was like an hour after I started cramping and feeling like achy. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I miscarry because of this stupid car accident, I will be so mad. It was like some teenage kid who like didn't see me, slammed into the back of me. Like, but I was so I called the fertility center and I was like, I need to come in. Like, I want to check on the baby. Like, I just am so scared. And so we were in, and there was just the tiniest little heartbeat. It was like this itty bitty sac with just like an itty bitty tiny little heartbeat. But then next to it was this big, huge black bleed. And they were like, okay, you do have a bleed. So that's probably why you're crampy. Like, you need to go on bed rest for 3 weeks. Like, you need to be super careful. You want to let that bleed heal. And so we went back in 3 weeks later. We brought Steele and Perry, our kids, with us because they wanted to see their little brother or sister. And so we were in the ultrasound room and they zoom in and there's like this tiny little heartbeat. And then next to it, you can see the bleed. It's just like a dark bleed. And she's like zooming into the bleed. And she was like, I looked at the screen and it was like, and I said, is that another heartbeat? And she was like, that's another heartbeat. But that's not hard because she said, it's really small though. So it's measuring smaller than the other one. So you could be having twins, you might not be. So don't go out and buy two of it, like already that hope was planted. And I was just like, oh my gosh, twins would be so amazing. Like I
Totally.
died. He was like, who? Oh my gosh, who? And I was thrilled. And Harry, my little daughter, she was just so excited. Every night she would pray for baby B, like, please bless baby B that it will just keep growing. And I was just so excited. And then at our next ultrasound, there were still 2 strong heartbeats. And yeah, I had a twin pregnancy that was really, really hard. I think that's where, like, if I would have known I was having twins, I probably would have let my body recover for longer because I had 3 babies within 18 months. It was just a lot. So, yeah, I have my little twins now. They're 6.
And the cutest ever.
I love them so much. And it was the best thing. It's like the best scenario because we have Steele and Perry that are older, those 2, and then Lennon and Evie, which are my little twin girls. They have each other and they just play together all day long. You know how it is. It's the cutest thing ever seeing them have just a little built-in best friend.
Oh, the best.
Kindergarten, and I just love it. I have loved having twins so much. I think I like probably told you that a million times. Like, everyone's always is like twins is just so hard, and I was like, I agree. Like, it's a lot, but it is the best. I love twins. It is the best. So that's kind of my story. That was the long version.
That's amazing, though. You've just been such an amazing example. One, I appreciate you sharing all of that and sharing your emotions and feelings and a lot of that in-depth things because I feel like we are all feeling those emotions in it. And it's really comforting to hear and know that, like, okay, I'm not the only one feeling this, and so I love that. But one thing I love from your story is that you were able to pivot in a lot of points. And I loved that you are someone who figures something out and then goes for it. And I love that about you. Like you are really amazing at doing that. And so I think that's a really great example to see though that like if something's not working, it's okay to readjust and change or it's okay to keep looking for other options. Like you might think that doing the fundraiser is going to work, but if everyone's not on board, there could be another option and you found the surrogacy. And so I love that I think that's a really great example too to follow to be able to pivot.
Infertility, that's totally how the infertility journey is it's very like you'll feel like you have a lot of roadblocks. It's like
Mm-hmm.
exactly like from the beginning when everyone goes through infertility, it's like you think one thing, you think, oh, we're going to get pregnant. This is going to be, and then it's like roadblock. And then it's like, oh, you have to do in vitro. Oh, nope, you don't just have to do that. You have to go here. Oh, you have to go to California. You've got to do this. You've got to like, I think something that helped me a lot was just staying focused on the end goal.
Mm-hmm.
And however you need to get there is going to look different for everybody. And I think something that's tricky is just dealing with people's inquisitions of like, and I got this all the time, and a lot of people will relate to this, but I got multiple people that just like, well, why don't you just adopt? Like, there's so many babies in need of a home, or why don't you do foster care, or why don't you? I think how people build their families is so unique and so personal to everyone. And I think that one way can work for one family and one way doesn't work for another family. And I think just like when someone's pregnant, you would never say to them, oh, well, why did you get pregnant? Why did you adopt a baby? No one would ever say that to someone that just got pregnant on their own. It's just so unique because it has to feel right. And we always did what felt right. We talked a lot about different options to building our family. And at one point, foster care did feel like I felt a draw to that. And I spent a few years like looking into that a lot. And that just didn't end up being the path that we took. But we always looked at all of the options and we figured out what was best for our family, just like each couple or each individual should look at what feels right to you.
Yeah.
And I think just giving yourself grace and time to figure out what feels right to you individually. And if you do go the route of infertility treatments, same thing. I think that you should find what feels right. Find a clinic that feels right. If you have a doctor that you don't like the way that they treat you, or they're not telling you something that feels right, you have to pivot. You have to say, okay, like I know I've invested money or whatever time in this fertility clinic, but it doesn't feel right. Go find someone that does. Find someone that, or even within a fertility clinic, switch to a different doctor. If you have a nurse that you don't feel like is treating you kindly, or like they're just really abrasive, or what, like ask for a different nurse. I think that
I love that so much.
Fertility, like you have to just do what feels right.
Yeah. I love that so much because I do think a lot of times in this industry, I remember feeling so desperate and looking for answers. And I remember you had told me that you were like, research doctors, try out a few, interview them. And that was like the best advice ever. And it's funny because I tell that to people all the time now where I'm like, my friend Emily told me, interview doctors and find one that works for you, because sometimes forget that we do have choices in this matter, and that we are in charge of our bodies and what we want. And so finding someone who aligns with that it's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. I think it's especially in like the medical industry in general. I think, taking that power back of like, I want to listen to what I feel is best, because you do know, like, I think that you feel that way for a reason. And that's how I always like listening to that little voice in my head, like everything's going to be okay. I don't know what that means, but okay. Like, and everything was okay.
I'm just like thinking about all the amazing things and advice you've shared, and it is just incredible. You have just experienced so much and are full of wisdom in this industry, and I'm just really grateful. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. It feels really good to be on this side.
Does it?
I feel it's so interesting, like being in the years of like the thick of infertility. And now I really can say I'm on the other side of it. Like our family is complete. It's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah.
Like a breath of fresh air. Like we did it. We made it. We fought through that. And like I said before, I think having a podcast like this of giving people hope that there are a lot of people who have made it through, and you will too. And you're going to get on the other side and realize that going through that makes you a better parent. And that's how I felt like when I was awake in the middle of the night with a sad baby. I just felt like I'm so grateful. Like I'm so grateful for, and it also makes you slow down a little bit. Like I tried really hard, especially with my first, 'cause I didn't know if he was going to be my only kid. Like I didn't know. And so it was like, when people would say, like, oh, just wait until they start walking, or, oh, wait until they sit up on their own, or wait until, and it's like, no, I just want to soak up every single little stage of his life now. I want to live in the present moment because I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to do this again. And even with my twins, like I've soaked up every single minute of their little lives, like because I know that they're my last, and it just makes you more present. It makes you more grateful. And I know I'm sure you've experienced that.
You taught me that though. Like I remember you saying that to me. You had said going through infertility made me appreciate being a mom more. And I remember thinking about that. And I felt that same way on those late nights where it was like, oh my gosh, Emily's so right. Like I think normally I might be like, I'm so tired or I'm exhausted or just would come up with all these things in my head. But instead of thinking, I am so grateful for this moment. And it just really helped me be present.
It's all about perspective. Like
Perspective for
you
sure.
still feel tired and you still feel discouraged. You still
Exhausted.
feel all those things, but the perspective is just so much grander when you have that in the perspective of, I don't know if this is ever going to happen for us.
Yeah.
Like that's a different perspective that infertility gives you. And so
Mhm.
for those listening who are in the thick of it, hopefully you will someday have that perspective of, I'm so much more grateful than maybe I possibly would have been if I would have had a whoops baby.
That would be awesome.
I know. We're like, oh, whoops baby. Like,
Yeah, I know.
we're down at now where we're like, no whoops babies. Like, we're done. We're past that stage. I mean, yeah, now we're definitely no whoops babies here.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So, for those in the thick of it, do you have any words of advice or encouragement for that stage of like, how did you get through those hard moments?
I think one, finding a good support system is huge. Surrounding yourself with people who are there for you, who you can talk to. I think finding people who have been through it is really valuable. Listening to a podcast like this. I remember after we went through vitro, there was like a flood of people who, because this was back in the blogging days. So I would always blog and write all of our stories. And that always brought in people that I probably wouldn't have met, people shared. And I remember being on the phone with random strangers, talking them through their injections and like, this is what you do. This, and I actually went through a stage where I'm like, infertility clinics need like a hotline of like phone a friend, like that you can talk to when you are like confused or like, oh my gosh, I have so many bruises on my butt. If I have to do one more freaking injection of thick progesterone in it's like, but just having someone that's like, I know how that feels and it sucks, but I promise you it's worth it. Like, do this. Like someone who knows. Like, I wish that would
be an amazing service. Yeah. And it's totally needed.
So yeah, having a good support system, finding someone who has been there is so valuable, and just leaning on each other, like going in through infertility. Like I remember someone told me when I was, of course, in the thick of it, that like people get divorced because of financial reasons and infertility. I was like, wow, okay, thanks for that.
Right.
That's like,
Yeah. So
like it is straining on each other, but you can view it like that, or you can view it like this is making us so much stronger. Like we're in this together, and avoid the blame game. Like, when I was sick of it, it was always an us problem. It was never ever oh, we're going through this because of you. Like, never. It was always, we both had to endure it together. Like I had to go through all the injections. He had to deal with so many like feelings of just like guilt and sadness. Like, oh my gosh, like I'm sorry that I don't have sperm. Like
yeah.
it's just leaning on each other and, working together. I think just keeping the focus on the end goal, which is a family. And, you might have to pivot. It might look different. For my story is very different from your story. Like no two stories are the same. No paths are the same. And realizing that you're going to have to find your way there. And once you get on the other side where I am, it's a good feeling. We did it. We did it. I have 4 kids. It's like, I wish I could give myself a hug 15 years ago. Like, it's all going to be worth it. Yeah. Just keep going.
That older version of you cheering you on in the background. Wouldn't that be amazing? Like knowing a little insight of what's into the future. But, I guess that's sometimes what makes the journey so tough but rewarding is, being able to look back and seeing those moments of achievement. So, I mean, going through infertility, is there anything you learned about yourself?
Yes. I remember after I had done in vitro for my first and my second, that's actually, I think, is that when we met for the first time? Was that bar? Mm-hmm. I was going to extend bar doing classes, and they asked me if I'd be interested in being like an instructor. And I was like, no way. There's no way I could do that. And I remember thinking like, but you can do really hard things. Like you've been through in vitro twice. Like that is hard. It's emotionally taxing, physically taxing. Like you can do hard things. And then I remember, training to become an instructor and becoming a teacher. It's kind of like building blocks of like, oh my gosh, like I did that. Now I can do this. And then it was like when I decided to become a surrogate, that was kind of one of my mantras when I was looking at being a surrogate. I just remember thinking, I can do hard things. Like I'm capable. I am strong. I'm really capable of doing hard things. And so I remember I had like a bracelet that said, it was like at some market or something, and it said like, I can do hard things. And I would wear it. Like I look back on that whole journey and how like it's like these building blocks of like I am capable of doing really hard things, and I'm stronger and better. And yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I have taken away from it is how strong we are as women. Like it's a lot to go through. Yeah. And I had like a giant fear of needles. Like I hated needles. And I remember when I was like, I have to have how many injections? Mm-hmm. And I remember every single time I'd have to like close my eyes and take deep breaths and like, but you can do hard things. We're so capable of doing hard things. And now when I go and get a blood draw, I'm like, oh, blood draw. Like,
no big deal.
Before.
That's really the truth, where it's like those things that were so scary and intimidating in the beginning that like give so much anxiety and stuff. In the end, all of a sudden it just became at the end, no big deal.
Okay.
Nothing new.
I know.
Oh my gosh, Emily, you are seriously so incredible. And I just want to say a big thank you so much for coming on today. I feel like you've just shown so many examples of being positive through the journey, being able to pivot, being able to do your research and find out things, and just all your resources. And I just want to thank you for sharing all your knowledge and everything. And so Emily is an amazing photographer. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you to do photos or anything like
So
that?
and that's actually kind of part of the reason why I'm in family photography. I don't do weddings. I mean, I do some commercial work, but I love working with kids. I love capturing families. It's like my passion of capturing just people's love. And I love photographing children. Like they just brighten my day. And I love getting them to be comfortable in front of the camera because it can feel kind of scary. But just on Instagram, my handle's Emily S. Brady photo. That's where I usually am in touch with most of my clients.
And I'll make sure to put a link to her Instagram in the captions below.
Yes.
Because you are amazing. Like our daughter's Mickey Mouse birthday photos, and that was so fun. And they turned out
I miss you guys.
like cherished photos. Oh, thank you so much, Emily. You're seriously the best.
Love you.
And that's
Bye.
right there. Looking for a support buddy? Join our social media pages to meet and make new friends. Thank you so much for stopping by the Infertility Club. Wherever you are at in your journey, don't forget, you got this.